typically don't do like a big old introduction. I just kind of like get into it. I'm very interested in neuroscience, but what I know would be considered dangerous.
Right.
So maybe we could just start there. Like, what is neuroscience? Like, what is that field, and what is your involvement, or what do you specifically look at?
Yeah, I mean, okay, what is the definition of neuroscience?
Yeah.
Study brains, I suppose. It's the science the way that I kind of, people always ask this question, the difference between psychology and neuroscience is neuroscience looks at the mechanisms, the sort of hardware component of the brain, and then psychology kind of looks at the software. I hope I'm not butchering that and upsetting any psychologists, but that's my kind of take on it. But I did my first research in plasticity, so how the brain changes. And then I went on to do my master's in basically decision making and how we allocate energy resources in the brain to various activities throughout the day. So obviously I didn't use this in my research, but for layman's terms, kind of like mental currency. Where are you spending your mental currency? Because we have a finite amount of resources, daily resources, cognitive resources. So if you're giving them to, social media or whatever, I'm not putting morals on any of the activities, but it's just to show what's kind of taking more energy and what isn't. So the premise of my research was that people think that during the workday, they take in a mental break by going on social media, scrolling, checking emails, replying to text messages, but it's actually using more cognitive resources. Then they sit down at their desk and they feel even more depleted. And then they go on social media to try and get that boost. And it's kind of like becomes a
negative cycle, like a depleting cycle, right? Like it's emptying the tank rather than filling the tank.
Exactly.
So that's what you focus on now? Is that like that like almost brain bandwidth and where you spend it effectively? And so if regularly changing your brain's like requirements, is that the right way to phrase it? You're depleting yourself. What fills it up? What are the things that you should do rather to build it up is the question.
Yeah, exactly. So I was looking at decision making and attentional resources. So how we allocate those attentional resources, as the hypothesis looked at, doing things like meditation, walking, just kind of closing off from the outside world that has an external stimulus can help replenish these cognitive resources. So if you were to walk on a treadmill all day for 8 hours, which is your working day, let's kind of, assimilate that to cognitive resources, you'd be tired, right? You're not going to then take a break and go on the bicycle and assume have enough energy to walk again. So that's kind of the premise. So take a little mental break before you go and do on all these other things, especially because going from meeting to meeting, it's quite a cognitively demanding job being in a 9 to 5 or any job really, so yeah.
So just practically what you're saying is that like if I'm working, find a way to take a mental break that isn't mentally taxing. And so does that mean going for that walk is removing stimulus, or is it a different type of stimulus, or what practically should you do in your day to give you that break?
Well, things like mindfulness meditation and just closing your eyes essentially is going to be the best form of replenishing cognitive resources. But anything, so we have 3 major networks in the brain. One is your default mode network. So that's your default mode of thinking. Those kind of thoughts that you're thinking about nothing, but they run around, and then you have...
I have a very good nothing box.
Yeah, exactly. It's your idling mode, right?
Yes.
And then you've got central executive network, which is what you're doing probably now when you're writing emails. You're not pondering on life. You're engaging with me.
Yeah.
But those 2 networks work in tandem, like a seesaw. So when one's off, the other one's on. And when we're in that central executive function, we're recruiting networks that are responsible for more cognitively demanding tasks. So that requires a lot of energy. So taking a break from anything that's going to sort of shift you back into default mode thinking that doesn't have an external stimulus on you, that can essentially take more from you, for lack of a better term, will help replenish. So, things like walking, not being on your phone, meditating, maybe even a stretch, even just like a power nap, 10-minute power nap where my clients close their eyes and just kind of switch off from the world and just replenish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you could do a power nap, you could go for a walk, you could just close your eyes. Yeah. Would a workout be considered that?
Ish, depends, it depends on like how adapted you are to exercise, like George, for example, he's the kind of guy that can work out at 10 o'clock at night. He's like, I haven't done it today and I need to do it. He'll always find time to work out. So for him, that'll probably be a way of switching off. but for someone who's maybe like finds it a challenge, it'd be different.
It's like a stress more than a reward, right?
Yeah, but exercise is a good kind of stress as well. So
Yeah.
there's other benefits involved with that. It really does. Does really depend.
And so just going on that sort of the workout theme, just carrying on with that, is there a way to improve your brain fitness, like for its capacity to do things for longer and more efficiently?
Yeah, I mean, exercise is, what I do as a job is I try and make the unsexy sexy, like exercise, sleep, nutrition, meditation. When I go into organizations and I talk about these things and the neuroscience of what your brain is doing, and people are like, penny drop, grown men kind of going, okay, I think I'm going to start doing that, Whereas before it was kind of just HR saying that you should do these things, they're good for you. But exercise is one of the best forms to, maintain brain health. So when we contract and release muscles, we actually release proteins called myokines, which have a direct line of communication with the brain. They cross the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is essentially a barrier that dictates what can come in and what can't go into the brain, and it's very tightly regulated, as you would imagine. These myokines can actually cross the blood-brain barrier and have positive effects on the brain. So to give you a couple of examples, you have things like BDNF. So BDNF is a brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It essentially helps synapses make new synapses. It helps neurons make new synapses. It maintains cell growth, cell health, cell integrity. So, when we looked at the brains of post-mortem individuals that maintained healthy physical activity throughout old age, they had more of these presynaptic proteins in the brain, which was then correlated to higher synaptic integrity, less neurodegeneration. Okay. So, I can actually stave off neurodegenerative diseases through exercise.
Okay.
And you've got things like irisin, which is anxiolytic. So, just exercise has these kind of communication lines with the brain that can help have anxiolytic effects in the sort of fear processing centers of the brain. I mean, I could go on forever.
No, go on forever. This is the show to go on forever. Like I love this topic. So for me, I felt so lame the other day. I was at a sort of an entrepreneurial talk. I was part of a panel, and there were like sort of very qualified panelists who have at various stages of their startup journeys. And they went around at the end and said, what are factors or skills or tips that you found that have had massive impact in running your businesses? And everyone came up like different marketing strategies, different things in relation to product fit, listen to their customers, and I landly stood up and said, for me, it's getting the basics right. Yeah. Sleep, look after yourself, manage your stress, eat well. These tend to be the things that we abandon most when things are going bad. Exactly. Badly? Bad. Yeah. But as I said it, I could see the room bro, give us the success give us the formula for making a lot of money, but that is the formula. And I definitely felt and I tend to develop really bad habits around the good habits when I'm overloaded. You lose the motivation for those basic disciplines. Yeah. And so, why is that? Why do I suddenly want to abandon really good habits for me when I'm very stressed?
Yeah, it's actually a conversation I have with my partner all the time. So we've it's funny because when you're in that state of stress, you want to lean towards things that you think are going to make you feel better, like lounging around, watching TV or whatever, eating junk food. But really it's the other stuff that's going to make you feel better. So we've been trying to teach ourselves to kind of lean on these tools that you think are going to make you feel better, or they're going to make you feel better, but they're harder to kind of overcome. Because there's a sense of delayed gratification there, right? You want the immediate reward of feeling better from the chocolate or feeling better from Netflix or scrolling on Instagram. But actually, that if you meditate, it's going to be a little bit harder that first 5 minutes, but it's going to have a much bigger ROI, return on investment on the time you're putting in. So, a simple one is it's quite difficult actually, is an ice bath in the morning. That's really hard to do, a cold shower first thing. But when you do that, it raises your dopamine really high and sustains it over time. And again, I love that you said that because everyone wants all these fancy kind of tools. But really, I was working with sort of really high functioning individuals, executives, and I realized that they all have it together in terms of business, but in terms of lifestyle, I'm like, oh my God, you're not even sleeping 6 hours, let alone 8. So let's, get these basics, right? And, the simple things are the ones that are going to really propel you, and they're all doing so much better. Mental health increases, decision making, because your brain is, it again is a finite cognitive resource. So if you're not replenishing it by sleeping, managing your stress, it's going to be, it's going to be taking that away from your daily activities. So now all of a sudden you're compromising on the quality of decisions, the attention that you're paying, and then kind of this self-deprecating sort of path you go down by reinforcing it. Okay, now I'm tired, so I'm going to eat junk food, and then I'm not going to exercise, and then next thing you know, it's really pulling on all of the resources.
Yeah, it's funny for me, like the sort of the let's term them like the less optimal habits are very much related around food, right? Like, so there is an immediate like gratification you can get from eating the bar of chocolate or having the burger or whatever it is. It immediately ties into a reward system that says you're okay, things are cool, you've got your carbohydrates, but I find that the immediate depletion or the need to fulfill that is much faster rather than like the short pain of a 10-minute cold shower. It's a crappy 10 minutes. Not that I do a cold shower for 10 minutes, like maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but it is a tough time. Exactly, but you don't have to replenish that activity very soon. You can go 24 hours before you have to reboot that. Whereas the bowl of ice cream, the watching, binging on Netflix, it really becomes a very shallow bowl to keep filling up.
100%, and that's because when we have dopaminergic activity, we also have a pain so dopamine is anchored in a pain system as well. So what that means is you get a hit, you feel good, then your brain goes, we want a little bit more of that. So there's a temporary pain that it's manifested in the form of have more chocolate, have another cigarette, have more. And to get over that, you have to sit with that discomfort. But most people don't. Like, I want more. And a really classic example is, this is actually really interesting, but a couple of days ago, I was really craving Cocoa Pops. And I was like, I'm just going to have Cocoa Pops. I did. I could feel myself an hour later being like, I really want chocolate. And I was like, you're not going to go down this route because you've had the Cocoa Pops. But I know why I feel like that, why I'm in this kind of like reward-seeking behavior. And even the next day, I was like waking up at 8 o'clock thinking, I want Cocoa Pops for breakfast. But I sort of blunted that right there and then because I enjoyed the Cocoa Pops for what they were, but I wasn't going to then drag it on because I understand that dopamine activity means that I have to sit with that discomfort whilst the dopamine system kind of balances itself out again. And when that system's kind of like tilting very heavily, you can then, drive it into addiction. That's where addiction comes from. You've got these big hits, these big lows, and you can only sort of make yourself feel better by engaging in the activity that is actually making you feel just as bad.
Yeah, it is this thing. And I was listening to a podcast, Modern Wisdom, Chris Willicks.
Yes.
He was talking to Dr. Joe Dispenza, the neuroscientist, and the concept of the brain and then the body becoming the brain, right? And he's saying that essentially what happens is that your brain has to do so much. So then the body takes over the function of the brain. Say, like, these are shortcuts to things that I know that actually look after me. And so don't worry about the brain. I've got this. And so then the body takes over, and the body doesn't make good decisions. It makes short decisions. It makes like the easy decisions. And so the dopamine hits from food, chill out, just rest. You need a rest now. These are all like kind of like body-based decisions. And that awareness that you're talking about, like I had the Cocoa Pops, but I know what's happening. And you can short circuit it to let the brain be the brain again, to jumpstart the brain into action, to say, why is this happening? Why am I making this decision now? Okay, what decision should I make instead to make the brain and not the body the brain? And so it was really an interesting concept because if your brain can make you really sick, your brain can also make you really healthy. And so what do you think about that? Like, what is the perfect sort of the proactive brain medicine we should do daily to make us like really well?
Well, so back just to rewind a little bit, those are called mental heuristics. So whatever has been ingrained, your brain, when you're tired, will take. So mental heuristics are shortcuts that your brain takes to arrive at a conclusion. And if the conclusion has been, I feel rubbish, I'm going to do this, that's what your brain's going to repeat every single time, especially in dire situations when you're tired and you don't want to make decisions, because that's the route that it's always taken. That's the conclusion it comes to. And that's something that George and I, as I was saying, are trying to change. When I feel rubbish, I want to now start diverting to something that makes me feel better, so that becomes the automatic. So when George doesn't feel good, he thinks, I need to meditate. When I'm on my phone and I feel, that kind of like fuzzy feeling, like my brain's like a bit jittery, I'm like, I need to get off my phone and I need to meditate and I need to sit with this discomfort, knowing that I want to reach for my phone again, because that's that reward-seeking behavior again, but, sit through it. And I think that that's a really valuable tool. In terms of like brain health, there's so many things I talk about. Definitely, regular meditation. And what I mean by that again is like, not everyone wants to put on a playlist and, and that's fine. And I don't want to, also diminish meditation for, people that are sort of over practitioners. There you go. But, anything that can help you just replenish, because you have these kind of ultradian rhythms throughout the day that your brain and body. So within a circadian rhythm, we have ultradian rhythms. So there's going to be natural ebbs and flows throughout your day where you're peaking and then you're troughing. And making sure that in those troughs, you're really just honing in on those troughs. So if you're feeling rubbish, you're feeling low, you're feeling tired, then take a little break, meditate, slow down, and really just kind of sit with it. Because the other thing that happens is people go, I'm really tired, coffee, bang, let's get back up. And then you'll feel amazing for an hour, and then it's like, crash, go again. I drink a lot of coffee. I'm not going to tell you not to stop it.
I love coffee too.
I love coffee. I drink it because I love it, But I also know that there are times where I should have the coffee because I feel I want it. And sometimes I am really tired and I'll have the coffee. But then there's other times where I'll go, you know what, take a break, take a 20-minute meditation, then have the coffee, see how you feel. And I 10 times out of 10 always feel better when I do that.
Yeah. Some basics for me in terms of your daily start is always like delay the coffee. It's a difficult one for me because there's two things like fighting for that coffee is like, number one, to be awake, and number two is hydration. Yeah. And I like the taste of coffee in the morning. Yeah. I really like it. It's like exactly. But actually, salt and water is like a key one, and I definitely find my energy levels and my focus significantly better if I wait that hour to 2 hours before I have the coffee, and have the water straight away. And the water tastes so good. I put some lime and some salt in it, and it really is like, it really feels great. And I think it's because the salt, your adrenal glands, your adrenal receptors are active straight away when you wake up. And salt actually helps with that. Whereas with coffee, actually your adenosine receptors are the ones that are being impacted by coffee. So you're gonna have a major crash later in the day if you drink that coffee in the first hour and a half when you wake up.
Well, for me, and from a neuroscience perspective, so your brain operates in water, and it's got these action potentials. These neurons are communicating with each other through electrolyte balances. So sodium, potassium, calcium, loads of different ones, right? And they operate in the presence of water. And even a 2% dehydration can actually cause temporary cognitive sort of, not dysfunction, that's not the right word, but a decline, in brain function. So if you've gone, 8 p.m. is when you stop drinking water because you don't want to wake up having to go to the bathroom, and you wake up at 6, 7 o'clock, whatever time it is, that's 11 hours of you not having been hydrating your brain. So it's one of the things that I tell everyone to do. First thing is drink water, with electrolytes even better, and then definitely avoiding phone use. As soon as you pick up your phone, you use that to wake up, jacking up dopamine. Next thing you know, you're on a crash by like 9 o'clock, and then you're on this like roller coaster ride trying to just keep it up, So avoiding phones, 100%. For the first hour, ideally. Again, for me, that's really hard, but if you can do it, you've got the biggest return on investment on how your day's going to plan out. Secondly, water, first thing, as soon as I get out of bed. And then the last thing is either movement or meditation. So if I'm not walking the dogs or doing Pilates or whatever I do in the morning, it's a meditation, 5-10 minutes. It's like putting the sat nav onto my day. And it's it's funny because sometimes I don't do it and I can feel myself resisting against wanting to do this. And I'm like, why aren't you doing this? Like, it's going to make you feel better.
Yeah.
And every time I do it, I have the best day, whether it's productive or not, it's just mentally like clarity, and that's, I think, is anchored in the dopamine system, because you already have high dopamine and epinephrine and norepinephrine in the morning naturally. So the first 8 hours of your day, high levels of dopamine, high levels of norepinephrine. So you don't need to be raising those things really high. And in the afternoon, you're more serotonergic, because that then serotonin, you get melatonin. Melatonin helps you sort of wind down, go to sleep. So any activity that's more kind of requires less effort, I would say put it in the evenings, things like cooking, maybe even a stretch, yoga, but if you're trying to sort of adopt a habit of running, you're probably better off doing that in the morning, because you're more dopaminergic, more, norepinephrine is your sort of stress active hormone, I would say.
Yeah, it's because you want to try and program yourself where you're going to have not to overcome the momentum factor, right, or the motivation factor. And so if you get it done in the morning where you've got a high probability of being successful at that, it makes sense, right? Because you're overcoming less.
Yeah.
I find that if I miss my morning workout and I say, I'll do it in the evening, the probability of doing that decreases significantly. By the time I put my kids to bed and I'm like, I'm going to work out now, it's not as rewarding for me as like smashing it in the morning and feeling like I own my day and I have a lot of structure around that. And then why do we, my question is like, why do we kind of adopt bad habits? Like in terms of habit formation, bad habits seem to be much easier to do than good habits. And so why do we almost like sabotage ourselves to seek the bad ones, or to just fulfill bad ones rather than good ones?
Because we want immediate reward. We know that X is going to make us feel good right now. Y is going to make us feel good in 10 minutes, much better. But, this one's closer.
Yeah.
So let's go with this and see what happens. And then we're on this kind of trajectory where, you're paying with that pain balance scale, dopamine, pain. And it's hard to get off that seesaw sometimes, I don't know if you know that feeling when you're on your phone and you're like, I need to get off my phone. But then you're like on your phone anyway,
Yeah.
kind of like arguing with yourself. So it's definitely understanding that you will feel better and practicing it, because the brain likes to know that it's going to, get the result that it wants. So if you've done it enough time, if you've taken the path of, more difficulty, over time, that's going to become an automatic. Even if you sabotage sometimes, you're going to be like, well, actually, I've done this enough time to know that I'll feel better. So practicing those things.
Yeah, it is a tough one, because the world set up around us is really about convenience, and sort of routes to instant gratification are becoming very easy. And so the discipline here and living now is actually seeking discomfort. It used to be a natural state for us, as discomfort was standard. Yes. You didn't always have food. You didn't have lots of medicines to keep you healthy. You were governed by the clock of the day, which was sun up, sundown. And we've kind of like overridden a lot of these with comforts, electricity, medicine, internet, whatever it is.
The ability to walk into a store and buy your food and not question where it's come from.
Exactly. And so now being basic is the discipline. Being basic is saying like plugging into like your primal systems, and your primal systems are the ones that keep you healthy.
Yeah.
And being like very aware of those all the time. So I think it is very challenging. Like when I see people kind of like falling off, I'm like, you're fighting a bigger battle than you realize. Yeah. And so in terms of like programming your brain for performance, like in your day, do you have any sort of ideas around what that should look like, so that you can be like, as an entrepreneur, like what are key things that you should absolutely like program into yourself?
Yeah, so this one's, people don't like this, but sleep.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, sleep is, we have so many processes that happen, but you've got from hormonal balancing, for lack of a better term. So when we go into deep sleep, that's where you release growth hormone. Growth hormone is, responsible for repair, cognitive function, synaptic growth, regeneration of cells. So if you're not regenerating cells correctly, neurodegenerative diseases and other diseases, they don't start when you're 50, 60, 70. They start in your 30s, 40s. And then, depending on what habits you've kind of taken on in that era of your life, is then going to dictate how you end up aging, right?
Yeah.
So sleep is one of the biggest tools. Is it Matthew Walker? He wrote While We Sleep, and he says it's the number one optimization tool, but it's not sexy, right? Because no one wants to be told that they have to sleep 8 hours and sleep well. And, I see it a lot with people that scroll on their phones till late at night. I was at a wedding a while back, and this guy was asking me for advice on sleep. And the first question I asked was, what time do you put your phone away? And he just went, no more questions asked, because he knew exactly where he was going wrong, stimulating your brain. When we're on our phones, TV not as much, but, scrolling on Instagram, you're going from one scene to another, to another, to another. Your brain doesn't really understand what that is. We've adapted to obviously understand what that is, but it's still quite taxing on the brain. So you're operating in beta, gamma brain waves. Those are quite high frequencies. When you are supposed to be in deep sleep, so that you reach that in the first hour and a half of your night, that's delta. So you've got to go from gamma, beta, alpha, theta, delta to get there. So people are scrolling on their phones, rolling around trying to sleep. They might not even be reaching delta brainwave sleep. That's your slowest wave sleep, the most restorative sleep, where you release growth hormone. You activate something called the lymphatic system, which essentially cleans out the brain. It's like a washing machine for the brain, right? And if you're not doing that, you're getting toxic buildup, which could lead to neurodegenerative diseases, irritability in the day, all kinds of, different manifestations of it. And my point is, what was my point?
It's about sleep, how critical it is for building like a healthy brain, especially if you're not shutting it off in time.
Exactly. And then there was an interesting study that was published in PNAS, which is one of the most reputable journals, and they looked at individuals that slept for 6 hours, and in 1 week they altered 711 of their genes. That's around 3% of your genome, which is quite a lot. And half of those were downregulated in a way that was impacting their inflammation and immune system, and the other half were upregulated in a way that was promoting tumor processing, right? So that's quite scary. And then on top of that, in our REM sleep, which if you sleep a 8-hour night, you should be getting about 5 cycles, maybe 6. If you sort of sleep 6 hours, you're removing a whole cycle of REM sleep. That's where you release testosterone. Really important for both men and women, because the majority of the testosterone is released at night. So, older individuals that, start having troubles with sleeping, drop in testosterone, which is a catch-22, because testosterone helps you sleep. So, maintaining a good, healthy sleeping pattern is really important for all functions.
Yeah, so that for me is like really worrying, mostly because I fall asleep very easily in general. But our sleep is very disrupted. We have 2 small children. They are very bad sleepers. I don't know why. But in terms of an evaluation across our friends and family who have kids, our children are the worst sleepers. Like they don't do a full night. So, if my daughter wakes me up to go to the toilet and then she wakes up her brother and then he cries for a bit, like how disruptive or damaging is that to my sleep? Or is it's chilled, it's just a short break, and you would have that break generally in your sleep anyway?
Look, there is research around biphasic sleeping for parents. They looked at this for individuals that sleep 4 hours and then take a break and sleep another 4 hours. And there is research to suggest that could be fine. Obviously, long term, how old are your children? They're young.
2 and 4, yeah.
They're quite young, and hopefully that will level out when they get a little bit older. And you can catch up on your sleep. You can't catch up on sleep. But
it's just catch up on some forgiveness for them.
Yeah. Lean on those kind of protocols, the meditation throughout the day, replenishing those cognitive resources, sort of falling back on the exercise. If it means you're not doing a harder workout, just maintaining this kind of momentum, because those are going to have other contributing factors to your brain health. Yeah.
I mean, you spoke about the different brain waves and also came up on the Modern Wisdom podcast with Dr. Joe Dispenza, is saying that with meditation, you can actually start to get to a point where you get your brain into theta waves? Yeah. Theta brainwaves, which means that we are the most receptive to change. Then we absorb a lot of information then, and so if we want to make material changes to our health, our well-being, that's a really primal state to do that, and you can do that through meditation. So if I'm losing it on the sleep, when I'm awake, I can still alter my brain waves and do some really good work for myself through meditation.
There's a lot of research around self-hypnosis as well, which is hypnosis, but Dr. David Spiegel is a psychiatrist from Stanford Medicine. He's developed an app that helps you with sleep, productivity, focus, what else? Quit any habits.
Do you know what the app's called?
Reverie, Reveri.
Reverie.
If you go on their Instagram, they have a 14-day free trial. And I find that meditation's great, self-hypnosis is great. I would say that self-hypnosis is more kind of like you have a goal and you want to get there. And meditation is more like maintenance, something that we should probably be practicing as much as possible anyway. Sure. When I say meditation, I also mean just like mindfulness around your life. You know, when you're outside, be outside. When you're eating, eat, instead of, kind of like eating on the go, rushing to then get to the next thing, which I think is one of the things that happens a lot. So I've tried to be really sort of mindful around my lunch times, where I sit down and I eat and my phone is nowhere near me, because otherwise I'm scrolling, I'm eating, and it's like, you're eating in a stressful state. That's not normal. You're supposed to be in rest and digest during those stages. So
I've recently removed all social media from my phone, and it's a bit of a challenge, obviously, in terms of some of the connections that you need to make with like providers in your life, but it was interesting, like the first 2 days, how useless my phone suddenly felt. I was like, or what I was doing with my phone, the behavior was completely different as I started reading with it. I was like, oh, okay, well, there's this gap now, and I'm going to fill it with something else. And that was like really interesting. It's like how desperate my mind was to fill that. It's like, okay, well, what can you do with this thing? Okay, now you can read. So it's a bit of a gap to fill. Once you stop using it.
And that goes back to that kind of default mode network and the central executive network that I was talking about. If you can hone in on that default mode thinking, where you're literally doing nothing, kind of observing your thoughts, you end up becoming better at it. You start learning to problem solve, sifting out through anxious thoughts. A lot of people will kind of go to bed at night and they've been working all day, workaholics, classic kind of example. Now all the problems come in, so they lie in bed, rolling around at night, not being able to sleep, because now they're thinking about all the issues, because that default mode network hasn't been active all day, because they've been keeping themselves busy all day long. So, having a practice where you're kind of just sifting through these thoughts is really important.
I think it's just anxiety is a big problem too, because if you're incredibly anxious, you use chaos to quiet the noise of anxiety. So you then don't address the anxiety or what is making you anxious. So it's one thing to be immersive and focused in a task, but it's another one to manifest a lot of chaos around you through activity and projects and all those things. And you mask it, right? And then at the end of the day, you're left with the thoughts. You're left with because you can't feel it. So it again, it can be like a very negative cycle for yourself in terms of not addressing what you should address, and the quiet moments with yourself is where that starts to really happen.
Exactly, and that's that switch between those two networks that I was talking about, because they can't be active at the same time. So, and at some point, you're not going to be busy all the time, so you're going to have to sort of confront this part of your brain.
And I mean, you've said so neuroplasticity was a big sort of a big part of your background, right? It kind of led you down to where you are today. Like that declines as you get older, right?
Well, so we have evidence that you can have neuroplasticity well into old age. They're actually using neuroplasticity as a potential therapeutic intervention for dementia. So, we could potentially mitigate a lot of effects of dementia through neuroplasticity. So,
and just to explain it to people, what is neuroplasticity?
It's your brain's ability to make synaptic changes or changes in the brain. So a lot of people believe that once they sort of reach the age of 25, the way that they are is set and they're stuck in these ways, but we actually have the ability to change. Neuroplasticity is also really important because it keeps the brain malleable, if you will. So, and if there's a lot of, the way that I describe it is, if there's a lot of activity going on, kind of like overturning and changing, you're keeping the brain active and alive, if you will. It's almost like you're washing it out regularly, right? Yes. Whereas if it becomes stagnant, there's room for error, there's room for neurodegeneration. And once the neurons degenerate, you can't regenerate them. So neuroplasticity is actually synaptic plasticity because we can't create new neurons, but we can create new synapses in the brain. So that means we can change habits, behaviors at any point in our lives.
Okay, and so what's the best way to keep that to keep your brain plastic?
Plastic.
Yeah, what is the best way to keep your brain plastic? Like, what should we be doing?
So plastic comes from the Greek word plastikos, by the way. A lot of people don't know this, but it's the reason why it's called plastic surgery.
Okay.
Not because it's attributed to being a Barbie doll, but it's because we have the ability to mold and change. Plastikos means moldable and the ability to change, which is actually really interesting. Yeah, it's a fun fact there. Activity, both physical, breath work. I'm doing a breath work course tomorrow. It's one of the best ways to maintain neuroplasticity, but exercise, predominantly aerobic training, increases BDNF, that protein I spoke about earlier, which keeps synapses strong. And then maintaining sort of engagement through life, whether that be through social interaction, having a purpose. People sort of start to degrade and stagnate when they lose purpose in life. And then keeping learning. I'm 32 now and I'm learning the guitar from scratch.
Yeah, I've just started learning guitar. This year I'm like doing it. I put the strings in, and I'm like, I'm going to start to.
This is your year.
This is the year,
yeah.
And there's some stuff that's coming back that I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of remember this, and now I'm like, it's tough. It's tough on the fingers, and I'm kind of like banging my way through a lot of the stuff, but it's trying to learn something new, a language, a skill, a task, and there's got to be a place for that stuff. And I find actually if you fill enough of these kind of gaps in your day with like really beneficial things for yourself, like you do feel very energized, you're super like motivated all the time. You're giving yourself a break to live in the present and just. If you're struggling through learning to play the guitar, all you can think about is where your bloody finger should go. And you're not thinking about anything else. So that's like a really good state to be in. It's a very clean, noiseless state, which is frustrating but very good.
I love that you said that actually, because there's a woman called Dr. Mithu Staroni. She's a neuroscientist from the UK. And she basically was one of the first people to quantify stress. So basically, when you become stressed, your body releases inflammatory cytokines in response to stress to make sure that it can repair cells and get ready for the recovery of the stressful event. So now she could quantify stress on a biomarker scale, which is amazing. And what they did is they took two groups of people. They told one group, they stressed them both out. I can't remember exactly how, I need to read the paper again. They told one group to sit on the sofa and relax, and they told the other group to engage in Tetris. The group that was engaging in Tetris actually recovered from the stress a lot quicker. So inflammatory biomarkers were removed quicker than the group who was sitting down, because when you're immersed in something else, you're not thinking about the event. But if you're going home or going on the sofa, your brain is still thinking about it, but the brain doesn't always know the difference between reality and thought. So it still perceives that the threat is there. Okay, whereas if you do something like a hobby, something that completely takes your mind off things, you can actually recover from the inflammation and the stress.
And I think often people associate like hobbies with money or a cost. And if you have financial stress, then you tend to, I can't start a new hobby. But actually, a lot of hobbies actually don't cost that much. And we live
nowadays.
You live in an age where information is free. And so if you want to learn the guitar, it's pretty easy to do. It's not easy to do. It's easy to get access to the information.
Yes, it's a bit harder probably on YouTube, and you're required to sort of have more motivation to drive yourself. Whereas if you're going to a lesson, I go to a lesson twice a week, so I appreciate it's, easier. But you absolutely can. There's availability to.
Yeah, and I think also like just on that, going somewhere for a lesson creates like a destination of focus to do something, because I find like if you go to the gym, if you go to the office, if you go to your lesson, you are going with the task in mind, and you tend to be very focused in that. So creating different spaces to do something where the destination is clear and then you actually move to a different space is quite good for you in terms of focus and less distraction. I'm not a big work from home advocate actually, and not because it benefits me. I like the flexibility. Like if my kids need something, I can work from home. But actually, I find it better for my focus and my clear thinking if I go somewhere, if I go to the office.
Well, your brain is a wonderful piece of machinery that operates on association. So people that work in their rooms, I'm like, no, do not do that. Because if that's your associative place of work, how are you supposed to shut down and sleep, you know, in the evening? So I agree with you. Like, home should be a place of relaxation. In an ideal world, maybe you'd have an office, even like, you know, George and I are talking about putting like a kind of container in our garden so that we could then walk to the office if we're working from home, and then walk back home, and kind of keep those two things separate. So you're not bringing work stuff into your house, because I think the house needs to be a bit sacred.
And so you mentioned George a few times, just to clarify, that's your partner. And what is it like? Like, what is his role? What is his work, and how does your neuroscience knowledge like impact your daily household living?
Well, George is a performance coach, so he works with athletes. You know, so we're very aligned, which is great. He actually wants to do his master's in neuroscience, which is quite fun.
Awesome.
That'll be interesting. So yeah, it's great because, you know, we kind of hold each other accountable. If he's doing something and I can see from the outside, I'm like, well, that's because, you know, you should be doing this, and he'll go, yeah, you're right. Rather than being like, oh, don't tell me what to do, you know. We can kind of tell each other from an outsider's perspective how we should. So it's a very healthy relationship, because, you know, I'll say, you know, I've had a really hard day. I'm sort of at 20%. I can. That's how much I can give. If you annoy me, I'm probably going to pop. And we're quite forgiving with each other. You know, we don't sort of hold on to it, and then sometimes you'll poke the bear. And
but that like deep awareness of your state is like really important for, number one, stopping yourself from being triggered, and number two, communicating with your partner or people you work with, any type of relationship. If you heighten your awareness in yourself, you'll be able to communicate your needs better, and then it greases the relationship in many ways. And I think that's a big gap today in terms of communication. Everything it's either email, text, whatever, but there's that real communication, like, hey, this is where I'm at, and this is kind of how full my tank is at the moment, so this is my capacity. Do we have to do this now? Like, that should be part of the exchange. Like, any meeting that we start, like, not a good space for me. Like, can we program these meetings for a Monday morning rather than a Friday afternoon, because I'm now, you know, completely tapped.
And that's also, you know, that communication from a neuroscience perspective, again, when we communicate our emotions, feelings, you know, states, we actually activate the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logical thinking, which gets overridden by the limbic system, which is responsible for emotions, if we let it. But once we communicate, we'll say, I feel this way. In research, when people can accurately name their emotions, it actually diminished the amount of sort of friction it had on them, you know, the impact that it had on them, on their state. So as soon as you can kind of communicate that, you're already putting yourself back in the driver's seat and acknowledging, okay, I feel this particular way, rather than just kind of letting your emotions run with you. And obviously some days those things are going to happen, and that's fine, but how often are you letting that happen?
Is it better to be like a verbal expression, or can you express that mentally or internally?
Yeah.
Because I've noticed with myself is that, let's say that my kids are irritating me, and I'm like, I say, like, in my head, okay, I know they're irritating me. I'm going to be in control. This is going to be hard. Like, I feel like I'm mentally telling myself that this is going to happen, but then I lose my mind even worse. Like, it seems to be like short circuit. But I've kind of, like, I was acknowledging that I'm in control, and this is fine, and like, maybe at this point it's not fine. But I've also noticed that if I say to my kids, like, hey, that's not cool, that's going to frustrate me, my response to them is better after that. And first of all, I've communicated, so they'd normally dial it down a little bit. But it almost like I have a better response to it by saying it out loud rather than saying it in my head.
So that's what I was going to say. So when we think thoughts, they run around kind of in that default mode, network type thinking, where they take up a lot of space in the brain. And sometimes thoughts don't have a beginning and an end. I don't know if you know that feeling where they're just kind of running around, seemingly incoherent.
Like a mist.
Exactly. But you know what you're thinking, but you can't really explain it. And that's a classic example where people say, I don't know how to describe what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking, right? that's that, because the brain takes up a lot of space with these thoughts and they don't have a beginning, they don't have an end. As soon as we put it into a sentence, you can now, sort of logic, if you will, the feeling that you're feeling, right? So you're putting a beginning, you're putting a narrative to it, so you're helping the situation. So I was going to say that if you're doing it mentally, we have this ability called metacognition as humans. It's the ability to observe our thoughts and then talk to ourselves about our thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah, it's quite a remarkable thing.
Yeah, think about that, like when you say it out loud, that is pretty crazy.
Yeah, but we have the ability to do that. Like I can observe my thoughts and talk to myself. That's metacognition. So maybe like making sure that you're structuring it like as if you were saying it out loud in your head rather than just letting it run. Because when it runs, it can become a ruminative state because it will just go off. It'll go. And if you're depleted, tired, irritable, it's just going to become one of those things where like then you catastrophize and then things are worse and then you're like, oh, and that thing, and then all of a sudden everything is like this big kind of mount.
Yeah. And so Jordan Peterson actually talks about that a little bit, is to when someone starts talking to you, you can't take what they're saying as what they're thinking. Right. What they're actually doing is just putting it tangible, almost like out loud.
Yes.
And it needs like a little bit of outside calibration.
Right.
So when you're communicating, it's important to say, okay, tell me what you think about whatever, and then you tell me. And then it's really important for me to summarize what you said back to you. To say, okay, so you're saying this. Because it gives you a chance to say, no, that's not what I mean. Yes. Right? Like, because often what you'll get caught in is that you say something, you think it's what you mean, and then when you hear it back, it's not what you mean. Yeah. But it's very hard to change tack then. And then you start defending. It becomes a defendable thing. I've got to defend this because that's what I said.
Yeah.
I'm a person and you must agree with what I say. So I think communication is a big part. So understanding how your brain works and understanding how to communicate that into the world is an important skill to start developing.
There's a book I bought in a Berlin kind of museum that was called, it was actually really funny, we've got it on our coffee table, and it says, poor messages create bad situations or something like that. Yeah. And I love that.
That's true. It is true. Like I think that often like we can defend the principle of what we said rather than what we think. Yeah. And that's it's a good habit to name your emotions, write down what triggers you, be able to identify those things very soon, and also give yourself time to articulate your thoughts well when you're communicating with people. And so it's okay to change what you say so that you can clarify what your mind thinks.
And it's a skill because, when we talk and when we generate words, we use the prefrontal cortex, or you're using verbal areas, Broca's area and Wernicke's area in the brain, which are responsible for language. So they're much smaller than that kind of default mode brain area that I was talking about. So it is a skill to be able to communicate how you feel effectively. And, through neuroplasticity, you can become better at kind of voicing how it is that you're feeling and without conflict.
Yeah. And in terms of sort of, I say it like programming, treating your brain like a computer, but programming good habits for yourself. Like, is there a formula for doing that? To say, like, I want to make a major change in my life, how I eat, how I see myself, how I talk to others, how I don't lose my temper. Like, you want to program in a brand new habit. Is there a good formula for doing that?
Yes, and I wrote about it. I've got a whole book called Rewire on how to change habits and behaviors based on these kind of steps. So it tackles the ditching the negative, so kind of addressing what is that holding you back. There is a formula, but it's going to be a lot. I think it probably deserves its own podcast in itself, so we might have to come back here and do this again. But what I will say
So what's the name of the book? Rewire?
Rewire.
And where can we get it?
Anywhere. It's sold by Penguin and HarperCollins. So you just type it in, the nearest one will come up at Amazon, Waterstones. It's available 9th of May. It comes out.
Okay, congratulations. That's
thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I've got this whole section on kind of like ditching the negative. So it talks all about like negativity bias, why you focus on the negative, and various aspects of kind of what it is that you need to let go of to then make these changes. Then I've got shift the narrative. So the step-by-step process, visualization is one of the most amazing tools for helping you get there. So your brain wants to keep you safe and it wants to keep you where it is. And the fear of the unknown is greater than the fear of what's known, even if what's known is not serving you anymore. Yes. But it's easier to stay here because the brain doesn't want change necessarily. So visualizing who you want to be, so you want to be this healthy person, can help you get to that point, right? So now you start kind of practicing what it would be like to be this person that wakes up and goes for a run, eats better, makes better choices. Because the brain can actually create new synapses through thought alone. So you're already carving out a pathway for this new direction you want to go in. But one of the things that I see the most is people will sort of come to January and they'll go, I want to do all these amazing things, and they'll change everything. Okay. And again, you've got a finite cognitive resource. If you're using all of it on trying to make these changes, by the end of the month, you're going to be depleted, you're going to be tired, you're going to lose motivation, you're going to drop all of it. Yeah. So I would say consistency, which, as lame as it sounds, it is consistency. Start small. Most people say, I want to start exercising, so they go to the gym 5 days a week the first month, and then they eat everything that's good. They cut out all the stuff that they've been eating. But then by February, March, they're like, this is actually really hard, because it takes a lot of energy to make changes. Your brain is having to go through a whole process of creating new pathways, just taxing. So what about maybe going to the gym twice a week for the first month, then 3 times a week for the second month? And then if 4 is your goal, do that by the 3rd, 4th, or 5th month, so that you're sort of establishing these patterns slower. Because if you're relying on motivation, you're going to do it perfectly the first month. Yeah. But then that's going to subside. Motivation always drops, and you can't rely on that, right?
You kind of want to step up the intensity in bite-sized chunks, right? Like because a small change will yield a very big, like a small change will yield a big difference or outcome. Yeah. So you tend to want to make a lot of big changes because you think it'll speed up the process. But actually, the process is going to take as long as the process will take. Yeah. So make one small change now, get comfortable with that change, make that change the habits, and then make that change who you are, and then make the next one. And that's a nice systematic way to make sure that it's a long-term lifestyle change rather than full hog all at once.
Well, research says it takes between 18 to 256 days to create a habit. Okay, so that's quite a big margin.
So what happened the whole 21 days?
Yeah, I don't know. They're debunked. Okay. But that just goes to show how many variables there are in having to create a change. Do you have to undo something that's deeply ingrained? Is it easy? Are you trying to become a marathon runner? Are you, there's a lot of kind of factors that contribute to how quickly it's going to take you to create a habit. But what the underlying theme is that it's a process. It's not something that you're going to do in a few months. You might, for some, obviously, like, journaling or meditating, I'm sure could be much easier than, I don't know, changing your whole lifestyle pattern. So yeah, if people want to change soon. But if you think about it, you're having to undo this whole database of programming that you've had from up until your age. If you're 30, you've got to undo all of that to now do new ones. If you're 40, you've got 40 years of, probably not 40 years of bad habits, but you know what I mean? So really, it's more about embarking on this process, but kind of enjoying it as well. And that's the thing I talk about in my book. And it's broken down into 3 phases. Phase 1, ditching the negative. Phase 2, making the change. Phase 3, maintaining the change. Because that's the step that people forget, is how do we keep these habits? What are the things that I need to be doing to make sure that I don't fall back into old patterns? And one of the things is that people always focus on where they're not, instead of focusing on how much they've...
Yeah, it's a standard in life, right?
So when I think about it, I'm like, I'm still not really playing the guitar that well. And I'm like, 3 months ago, I couldn't put my fingers on the C chord because it was too difficult,
Makes sense.
And now C chord is the easy thing for me to do.
And do you think that the focus on the negative is because the positive was like good for us and we don't have to fear it, but we focus on the negative because it was bad for us and we don't want that to happen to us again?
Yes, so we're programmed essentially to focus more on the negative because it serves us in terms of survival. So, back in the day, we had to actually focus on the negative more than we had to focus on the positive because it kept us alive. But we have this kind of hardwiring that can be changed if we pay attention to it. So the human brain the adult brain needs attention to make changes. So if you never let that come to the surface, you'll probably always operate in this kind of negative thinking. But, gratitude, all these kind of practices that help you see how far you've come rather than where you're not. And the other thing is, again, that dopaminergic behavior. I need more, I need to be there, I need more money, I need more this, more that. I'll be happy when. Yes. Rather than being happy right now and enjoying the journey.
Yeah, so understanding that unknown factor, like the fear of that is that unknown scary because maybe there's there's a tiger in the bush. Like maybe there's something there that can eat you, right? Like, so don't go there. Like, stay away from unknown. Stay where you can see. It might not be great. It might be really like it's raining and we're cold, but it's better than outside the cave where it's dark and something could eat us. So it's navigating the brain. It seems to be like really complex, but the rules for it are very simple. I think that we overcomplicate things in general. Like we overthink things, we over manifest. And in terms of visualization practice, to get that feeling of how good that would feel, like what is the method for that?
So again, Reverie, that app that I spoke about, they have the practices are helping you visualize. But visualization can be kind of, writing it down. What is your step-by-step process? Some people can't visualize mentally. It's called aphantasia. So they can't actually see mental imagery in their brains. But, people like that.
Aphantasia.
Yeah.
Wow, it's like it sounds weird because like fantasize, like it's the inability to fantasize.
Oh,
right?
that's so true. I never saw that. Oh, interesting. Yeah, exactly. So I have a friend like that. She can't see mental imagery in her head. So you ask her to imagine an apple, and she's like, I can't. It's weird. I don't. Yeah. Right. So, people who have aphantasia, or maybe people who prefer being more kind of like, writing things down, you can write it down. Like, what's your 3-month process? Where are you going to be in 6 months? What do you have to do to be the person you want to be in 12 months? And then kind of laying it down and having a plan so that you can kind of visualize this process of how you're going to get from A to B. Sometimes B feels like it's way too far ahead, Especially, let's use a sort of weight loss. I know is a classic one. If you weigh 150 kilos and you want to weigh 70, it's going to feel like a big journey, right? And you don't know what life is like at 70. So, being able to visualize that process is going to be easier. And Dr. Lane Norton spoke about this on a podcast, and I need to double check where that paper is. But he was talking about weight loss interventions. And out of all of the interventions, healthy eating, exercise, they all worked. The only thing that helped people keep the weight off were the ones who visualized themselves being completely different, being worthy of being healthy and being this person that exercises and looking after themselves.
Yeah, I think that almost like mental preparation around the task ahead is as important as writing the goals down, as saying like, this is what I will feel like this way. So you can give your brain something you remove the unknown, first of all, and then you can give your brain something constructive to work towards. Because a lot of the goals that we have are intangible till the goal is met. And so you've got this like unknown, intangible, it's easy to fall off that, like, because you're getting no reward from it. And also the movements on them are so small that you don't feel that like fulfillment, right? So when you suddenly look back at the before photo or the previous bank balance, or like thinking about where you lived before, that you suddenly it's quite good now. But in the journey, it's hard to sort of attach yourself to tangible rewards.
Is it James Clear who uses the ice analogy? I've never read Atomic Habits, which is remarkable. I should have read it by now.
Neither.
Okay. But I know one of my friends spoke about it. I'm pretty sure it's James Clear. But he talks about the ice analogy. So if you have a block of ice that's sitting at minus 20 degrees Celsius, to get to 0, it has to go through minus 19, 18, all the way to minus 1. But you don't see a change visually. But something is happening because at 0, it melts.
Yes.
Right? And that's the same thing with like some of the habits that we implement. You might not see the changes straight away, but they all have compounding effects that then, one day you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, actually I can do the C chord quite easily without having to think about it.
And your brain will start to shortcut the next chord, the D or the A, is like saying, okay, well now I know this like really well, and that's and then the development comes in pushing yourself into a new discomfort, right? To say, okay, well, what's beyond this? Is the strumming or whatever it is? And so why do you think we self-sabotage?
Well, one of the things that normally self-sabotage comes with kind of like beliefs around yourself. So that's what I was going to sort of tie in with the whole weight loss example that I gave, is the identity that you hold around what you want, and self-sabotage is kind of like this fear of you getting maybe what you want as well. If you don't know that you're going to get it, it's easier to know that you're not going to get it by sabotaging yourself than to put yourself out there and fail. Because people are afraid of failure.
Yeah.
And one of the sort of activities or examples, like not examples, but activities, exercises, there we go, that I give to my clients and in the book as well is preparing for setbacks. So, if we can plan what could potentially go wrong, so your kids might keep you up at night and then you're going to be tired, so you're not going to want to do it. Now you're better prepared because you knew that could happen. So now you have a plan B. You have an alternative to that situation. If your coach cancels on you, okay, I have that workout in the back of my pocket that I said I was going to do if that happened, instead of being like, oh, they canceled, I'm not going to go today,
Yeah.
So preparing for setbacks. And Michael Phelps in 2008, he broke the record of gold in the Olympics.
Yes.
And it was the Beijing Olympics. And he dove in for the 100-meter butterfly and his goggles came off. And you can actually hear the commentators going, oh my gosh, like kind of panic on their respect. They're thinking he's going to fail. He's going to, bomb out the whole thing. He won anyway. Yeah. And when they have the interview at the end with his coach, they said, oh no, we took that into consideration. We knew that his goggles could come off, but he knew exactly how to deal with it, knew exactly how many strokes to take before he had to tumble, turn, kick, and come back. And he won. Yeah. He swum the thing blind, which is remarkable. Yeah. But he visualized all the things that could go wrong and then made sure that he had an alternative, backup. Yeah. And his state of mind was calmer, being able to deal with it. Because now he didn't panic. He didn't go, oh my God, my goggles are off. What do I do? That's already a second gone. Yeah. He was like, okay, I knew this was going to happen. And he just carried on as normal.
Yeah, so I think from an entrepreneurship perspective, a setback visualization is also as important as success visualization, is to say, okay, what could go wrong? Yeah. And there's a lot, and what will you do in that instance is that what are the automatic behaviors you can put behind that failure that will automatically kick in? Okay, this is how many strokes, this is where the tumble is, go on and win the race. And I think that's really important, because I think the easy stuff is to say how much money we want to earn, how big we want to grow our company, what we want to do with it. But I think that the challenging stuff is to overcome fear, and why so many people don't start things. Say, okay, it could go wrong. What are we going to do in those instances if it goes wrong? So
I have a whole chapter on this as well, fear, the fear of failure. But really, the way that I describe it is your brain is a computer, right? It's got data that you've inputted, and it doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. It doesn't really understand failure. It just knows redirection. So you input some programming and it goes wrong. It goes, okay, now we know what to do to not do that again. That's just data. Yeah. So now we know that not to do that. And if it goes wrong again, we just redivert. When I explain that to my clients like that, they're like, mind blown.
So when you say your clients, who are your clients? I mean, how do you work with them, and like what is it?
They're generally executive clients, sort of businessmen, businesswomen, people who are, mindset coaching. I say coaching, we do everything from genetic testing to blood work to sort of leadership training. So most of my clients are kind of CEOs, executives.
All right, and so when you do blood work, you're doing like a full assessment of their blood work to see like any deficiencies, chemical deficiencies, hormonal stuff, build them back up, and then you work with them on the mental side of their...
Yeah, exactly. So we get the hardware component working correctly, sleep, hydration, blood work, making sure the nutrition's on point, supplements if they need them, and then we work with the software component as well. So I kind of always say, like, you can't make upgrades to the software if the hardware is not working properly. Yes. So that's why in the beginning my coaching was kind of like over the top, and then I was kind of like, oh my God, these people can't even sleeping correctly, let alone, making the right decisions. And then my biggest one is like, can you sit in a room with yourself in the quiet, and not be tormented by your own thoughts? Yeah. So I kind of get that baseline first, and that takes, up to even a year sometimes to work with clients to get those basics really working well, and them understanding how they feel when these basics are working correctly.
It's amazing.
Because it's hard to change someone's eating habits, sleep habits, drinking habits, smoking habits, all of that, and then go, okay, and we're also going to do mindset stuff, which we do in between as well, because obviously people need that as well. But yeah.
That's incredible. And so you have a seminar this weekend on breathwork and mind.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit more about that.
I'm collaborating with someone called Rob Ria. He's a breathwork coach, and we're sort of friends, I would say, and we just want to sort of explain the science behind breath brain. Oh my God, I'm getting tired.
Brain breath connectivity.
Yeah, breath work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, increasing mental resilience is another one that I'm always sort of banging on about with my clients, and my book as well is like, how can we increase our stress threshold, so our threshold to stress.
Okay.
And doing practices where you're deliberately putting yourself in stressful situations like exercise, cold exposure, breath work, we call it a hormesis, something that in the short term is healthy and beneficial for you. Your body will adapt and then overcome it and get stronger, but in the long run will probably kill you. Any kind of practice where you can overcome challenges and get yourself more resilient.
Okay.
So breathwork is a good one to do as well.
Breathwork seems to be like a really important thing because people don't breathe well under stress. I think there's some crazy stat that most people hold their breath when answering emails. Like there's just a lot that goes on around breathing, and even I find like if I'm very stressed, if I do like a double inward breath, it like really relaxes me, and I've started trying to incorporate these before like difficult tasks that I'm calmer in my approach to work, or even jiu-jitsu. Like before like a sparring session, I just make a habit of breathing in a little bit differently so that I'm in control of how I'm breathing, so that the rest flows a little bit more easily.
Yeah, and I give the analogy all the time. So, a boxer in a boxing ring, or someone who's doing jiu-jitsu. George does jiu-jitsu. It's always nagging me to do it. But, if your body's got a lot of adrenaline, but you can keep your mental state calm, that noradrenaline in the brain, or norepinephrine for anyone that's American, are going to be lower. So now you're basically separating those two systems and saying that we can be calm under pressure. Now all of a sudden you need more stress to trigger a mental stressful response. Okay. So, things like jiu-jitsu, putting yourself in these situations where your mind has to be calm, but your body is stressed. Fantastic.
And I mean, like post jiu-jitsu, where you've had an incredibly tough sessions that evening, I find that I'm incredibly wired, and the path to come down is quite difficult. I can't sleep. I have a terrible night of sleep. What should I be doing to then reverse the impact of that stress?
Yeah. Physiological sigh. Have you heard of that? Basically, you have so breathing is really important because you have a whole system in the back of your brain that regulates this subconsciously all the time. Mm-hmm. You're breathing without knowing you. You're not saying, you stay alive, breathe in that oxygen, but it's there. So when you're stressed, do you ever find yourself, you're sort of huffing and puffing around the house? You're like sighing, all right? That's a good thing. And most people associate it with a negative thing, but that's your brain trying to reset breathing control. So you can fast forward that, because again, we have the ability to do that as humans. We're the only animals, I believe, that can control the breath. With a double inhale, so long exhale. That double inhale actually pops some of the alveoli in your lungs back open, because they collapse in on themselves under stress and when you're sort of sympathetic. And then the long exhale dumps carbon dioxide. So you're actually resetting that system to tell your brain that now you're in a calm state. So 5 to 10 breaths. Do you know I'm sure you know Huberman. Yeah, his research looked at this. So his lab was looking at the best way to set yourself back into a parasympathetic state using breath. And the physiological sigh, I think he calls it cyclic sighing, some people call it physiological sigh, is the best tool to bring yourself back down. And the app Reverie, again, has that exercise in there. So they worked together, Dr. Spiegel and Huberman. Okay. And Dr. Spiegel is the one who's got the app called Reverie.
Amazing.
It's all coming full circle.
Awesome. Listen, I could literally talk to you for 3 days straight. I know that there's some deeper topics to explore, but we've been sort of smashing to this an hour. I'm sure people's mental capacity to absorb all this information. So we'll call it here. But thanks so much for your time today, and good luck with your seminar tomorrow.
Thanks very much. Yeah, as I said, everything's in the book as well. I pull it out a lot, all of this.
I'm going to be one of your first readers, so definitely.
Bless you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. We should do it again, maybe, yeah.
I'm keen. Whenever you're next in town, you're here, and I'm pretty mobile with the setup, so if you want us to do it in a hotel room or whatever, I'm keen.
Cool, yeah, we could do a dive deeper, kind of, yeah. Cool.
Specific topics, cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me.